What I wanted to do was simply introduce a new partner of ours at Beyond Borders, and that is David Pratt, the international editor of the Herald on Sunday. He needs no introduction, but actually what we do want to do is just simply announce that the Herald and Beyond Borders have begun a partnership and a cooperation. And so I hope, and particularly I will ask David to talk about it a little bit, but I want to say my thanks to David, because he is one of the few journalists that has consistently not only reported on Syria and all the MENA regions with some very brave reporting, but he's also picked up on this story about women peacemakers around the world, and has consistently reported on the developments in Scotland, in particular with Nicola Sturgeon. So, David.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, again. I agree with Mark, you've got remarkable stamina. Mark's already mentioned the fact that we've struck up this sort of collaborative arrangement or partnership with the Sunday Herald and Herald. It's something that I know, particularly with the Sunday Herald, we're very keen to pursue. The paper itself, of course, as you know, has always sort of prided itself on taking a particular political stance. It was the only newspaper here in Scotland, of course, that was pro-independence. Whether you agree with that or disagree with that, that was the paper's position. It's also, from my own perspective, a newspaper which I think also prides itself in making sure that we cover international affairs, that we're not sort of navel-gazing here in Scotland, that we look out and engage with the world, which is precisely what Beyond Borders is all about. So for that reason alone, singularly, I think it's fantastic to have this collaborative arrangement with Beyond Borders, and here's hoping it goes from success to success. Obviously, the debate, the Sunday Herald debate, as it's been titled in your programme, is about to happen now. We have a very distinguished panel. I'm sure it'll be very lively, given that the title, as I'm sure you're aware, is the new Auld Alliance, Scotland's Future in Europe and the UK. I'm sure there's a few people here with views on that, as our panellists most certainly will have. And there will be an opportunity, obviously, for you to bring questions to the panel after they've engaged in a little bit of jousting themselves. It only leaves me to thank you for coming along. It's great to have this collaboration. And I'm going to hand you over to John Kampfner, who will be the chair for this particular session. Thank you very much. John.
I completely endorse that question of stamina. We had, for those of you, and I imagine all of you were in for Nicola Sturgeon's event and the extraordinary rendition at the end of music as a vehicle for peace from Aleppo. That is quite a hard act to follow. So what we are going to have to follow with is nothing less than the future of Scotland and the future of the UK following Brexit. My name's John Kampfner. I used to be a journalist for many years. Now I'm running the Creative Industries Federation, which is the national UK-wide body for all our creative industries, commercial creative industries, publicly invested arts and cultural education. We did a big event on Tuesday evening with the Edinburgh International Festival. We've developed strong and increasingly strong links with the Scottish Government, Welsh Government, and particularly UK Government, and around the country, and particularly since the events of the referendum. Just for your reference, so we've been going for 18 months, independent of government, supported, however, by all political parties, bringing together the very largest companies in the UK, BBC, Warner Brothers, Burberry, Bloomberg, that kind of thing, through to the individual practitioner, through to our national museums and galleries across Scotland, England, and elsewhere, because the creative industries are the fastest growing sector in the UK. They are what project this country around the world. Wherever David Cameron, George Osborne, and their successors have gone and will go, the first question they always get asked is something around the creative industries. When is the next series of Sherlock coming on the TV? What is happening across our fashion industry, our music industry? They really are the UK's superpower. So our members, our 1,000+ members, were asked in an anonymous referendum, anonymous survey, what they thought. 96% voted to remain. And you will have seen the coverage around that with David Cameron at Abbey Road. That said, 11 o'clock on that Friday morning, as soon as it happened, we had summoned and galvanized our members and said, right, no time to lament. We have to work with all concerned to try to get us out of this quagmire, if you are feeling in that direction, or take advantage of the new opportunities if you are feeling in that direction as well. So that is what the framing of this debate that I would like to encourage our speakers and our audience really to use. It is very much, where do we go from here, rather than how did we get to here, and going through the rights and the wrongs and the duplicitousnesses, if that's the right word, or otherwise that went on, the mistakes that were made, who did well, who did badly. Let's try to begin the world from now. How does it work for Scotland? How does it work for Scotland and the EU? How does it work for Scotland and the UK? How does it work for the UK and our life outside the EU, not quite outside the EU, or however it may be. From your right to left, Richard Bacon, Conservative MP, and how can I call it? Charismatic Brexiteer, and you're most welcome. Ming Campbell, known to you all, former Lib Dem leader in the House of Lords, a long and impassioned advocate of and for Europe and for Britain's place in it. Alyn Smith, SNP MEP, known to you all for a very long time, but known to more after a particular speech at the European Parliament on that particular day. And last, but by no means least, Merryn, Somerset, Webb, columnist for the FT, editor of Money Week, and who took a, how can I call it, quite phlegmatic approach to how we deal with Brexit in one of your columns shortly afterwards. And let's make use of the opportunities. Richard, let's start with you, advocate of leaving. You must be happy as Larry. What is your what form of Brexit do we have now? Is it hard Brexit, out completely? Is it access to the single market, but then you have to make the compromises? Or can we get all of it, have all our cake and eat it?
I always thought when I first learnt the phrase to have your cake and eat it, as if there was something wrong with that, there really wasn't much point in having cake unless one could eat it. Unfortunately, as you'll see, I've probably eaten a bit too much in my life. I was camping in Herefordshire last week, and I was watching my 6-year-old son, we were picnicking, and he had a Scotch egg. And he took this egg, and he took off all the sausage meat, so that there was a perfect hard-boiled egg sitting there on one side. And then he took the sausage meat apart and started to eat it. And I was looking at him doing this, and sufficiently that he obviously realized this. And he looked at me and he said, "Daddy, you see, first I'm going to eat the Scotch, and then I'm going to eat the egg." And I've been trying to find a way to confer some political significance on this story so that I can use it in this discussion. And I've completely failed, but I liked the story, so I thought I'd tell it you anyway. I was a Brexiteer. I campaigned for Brexit. The east of England, the area that I represent, South Norfolk is my constituency on the Suffolk-Norfolk border, had the strongest vote for Brexit of any region in the UK. My own constituency was 52-48. It matched the national result for Brexit. But next door to me in Great Yarmouth, a traditional seaside town with some of the traditional economic problems of seaside towns, was something like 73% Brexit. In terms of Scotland, the thing that struck me in reflecting on this since is the extent to which, knowing, as many people obviously did, that voting for Brexit might lead to the breakup of the UK as we know it and to Scotland's decision being revisited to leave the UK, people nonetheless voted for Brexit. And that, although most people to a greater or lesser extent value the UK, and to a greater or less extent certainly in England, I think, insofar as they think about Scotland, which I fear is probably not a great deal, would probably opt for the status quo, that nonetheless, knowing that it was to put this at risk, people still voted for Brexit. I read the Declaration of Arbroath, or part of it, the other day in preparing for today, and the bit that struck me was the bit that said, "For as long as 100 remain alive, we are minded never a whit to bow beneath the yoke of English dominion. It is not for glory, riches, or honour that we fight, it is for liberty alone." And I found myself thinking, well, I agree with every word of that, except where it says we, I would have put the English, and where it says the English, I would have put the European Commission and the European Union. And the idea that we would consent or continue to consent to being governed by a lawmaking body overseas seemed to me, as an English conservative, unlikely. And if the price of that were that Scotland were one day to leave, then that would be the price that would have to be paid. The question now arises, what do we do, given that there was a decisive result in Scotland to remain, which was different? And I personally think that although the constitutional difficulties appear to be fraught to the point of being impossible, actually, with enough innovation and enough goodwill, I think it's conceivable that something could be worked out. We have all kinds of odd arrangements, not just within these islands, but across Europe. I mean, Greenland is not part of the EU, but it's part of the realm of Denmark. We have the Isle of Man, we have the Channel Islands, we have lots of different constitutional statuses. I was looking up the Ireland Act 1949 recently, because, as you will know, citizens of the Republic of Ireland can live and work and vote in the rest of the UK as of right. And it is, I was surprised to read this, but it is a matter of statute law, UK statute law, that Ireland is not a foreign country. It's not an overseas territory, it's not a colony, but it is not, as a matter of law, not a foreign country. So it seems to me, if we have the mind to do it, that we could come up with a set of arrangements that might satisfy everyone. I'm not saying it will. I also can't see an English Conservative government being particularly minded to facilitate this. It didn't surprise me at all that Theresa May stopped what she was doing in forming her new government and came to Scotland on I think it was on the Friday, before she'd even finished forming her cabinet. I don't think any British Prime Minister wants to be the one who lost the Union. I quite understand that. But I must confess to a sneaky admiration for nationalism. I've always got on well with the Scott Nats MPs I've known and the Plaid Cymru MPs I've known in Westminster, and my own admiration for them really stems from my own belief in self-government and the prime importance of self-government above all else.
Okay, so I'm just going to stop you there because once getting everybody else, but just in a word, yes or no, did I understand you correctly saying, you as a Conservative and Unionist, that's the name of your party, that as a result of Brexit, if Scotland votes to leave the UK, that is a price worth paying?
Yes.
Fine, thank you. Merryn.
Well.
What about, that's a good
let me
start because we've got some clarity here. Let's talk, if you would like to, or talk whatever you, about the economics of it, both the economics for Scotland and the economics for the UK. And I really want to try and tease the conversation into what is the future shape of the UK and its relationship with Europe and within the UK.
Okay, well, let me start by saying one of the most controversial things I wrote before the referendum was that if you wanted to keep the Union together, the UK together, the best thing you could do would be to vote for leave. Because if the UK left the European Union, there would be no way that a referendum for independence would ever be won in Scotland because of the economics. Now, the key point there is that the UK is a very, very successful union. The European Union is a very unsuccessful union. Now, to leave the UK would be to leave a very good one, join a very bad one. And becoming independent after the UK has left the EU would automatically mean joining the Eurozone, having to arrange your fiscal affairs in such a way as to suit the European Union, i.e. bringing your deficit down to 3% in order to enter. I mean, there may be terms on which Scotland can fiddle around with this, but the Scottish deficit at the moment, as we saw in the numbers out, last week were they out? The expenditure and revenue numbers. We saw there that Scotland has a deficit of around 10%. Now, that's intolerable for joining the Eurozone. So it would have to come down significantly. There would have to be austerity like, Scotland can't imagine, I can't imagine, I would hope not to see. So under those circumstances, with the oil price where it is, under the terms under which Scotland would have to join the EU, would have to join the Eurozone under those stipulations, I think it's verging on impossible for a case to be made for independence. Now, that's particularly the case given how many SNP voters voted leave. So I said at the beginning, if you want to save the Union, vote leave. And then you will leave a very unsuccessful union and you will stay in a brilliantly successful union. And I still feel that. I think it's very unlikely, although I know I'll be told that I'm completely wrong in about 5 seconds. I think it's very, very unlikely that you will see another referendum, because I know that no one wants the SNP to run another referendum that they will lose. And this is, to my mind, unwinnable, because economics really matter.
Right. Perfect.
Tell me I'm wrong, Anna.
Perfect cue. Alyn.
Well, firstly, it's great to see so many people here. Great to be back at Beyond Borders. I remember doing a debate about Europe this time last year, and it really does seem like a million light years away in terms of where things have gone since. So great to be back, and it is great that we're here to discuss how to find solutions to where we are. I was at a business breakfast with Anderson Traquair and one of the Scottish law firms, about 200 people on Tuesday morning, whatever it was, and one of their partners was talking about the 7 stages of grief in terms of the reaction to the Brexit vote, one of them being anger. And just as a declaration of interest, in case we're all getting too happy and smug with ourselves, I went straight to anger and I'm still bloody there in terms of all of this. And be in no doubt, the Brexit vote is a colossal act of self-harm. Never has so much been thrown away with so little consideration. The situation of Gibraltar, Northern Ireland, Scotland, Turks and Caicos, various other places around the world, zero consideration so that they can tilt at windmills that don't really exist. Even Richard today, and I've much respect for some of the stuff that Richard's been coming out with. Merryn, you just keep doing what you're doing. You're one of our best assets. Richard's point about freedom, nothing less. Freedom, nothing less, all of that stuff. I respect that. I absolutely respect that. But it's predicated upon a fact that doesn't exist, the idea that the EU is somehow telling us what to do. We have voluntarily joined a club. We have voluntarily joined a bowling club. You can't turn up to the grounds and demand to play tennis and then claim it's an infringement of your sovereignty when you're not allowed. We participate in how the EU rules come to be. We democratically vote for them as the UK or Scottish government, as the democratically elected MEPs. So when the Commission expects us to enforce those rules and govern the country by them, that is not an infringement of sovereignty, that's grown-up politics. And what the UK has done, after a campaign that was based on lie after lie after lie after lie, is throw all that multilateralism up in the air. Now, I'm an English qualified lawyer to trade. The contribution that English lawyers made to decency across post-war continental Europe was vast. The Convention of Human Rights was drafted by English lawyers. The extra-jurisdictional, externalized willpower that it all represents was designed by people from these islands. And it's been thrown away for nothing. So in terms of how we actually find a way out, we're all about the solutions these days. We do want to find something that works. There are, as Richard says, various exceptions to various rules. Increasingly, from a Scottish perspective, we're talking about 1 state, 2 systems, because in the north of Ireland, Northern Ireland is absolutely going to need a special status out of this. Otherwise, the peace process will be hugely undermined politically and in every other sense. So if that's going to happen for that, then Scotland needs to be part of that consideration as well.
Right, I want to get on in a second to the what kind of Brexit will it be, but can you, specifically to Merryn's point about this will make the continuation of the UK union more likely, can you address that point just in terms of your understanding of Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP? I mean, one would assume, given the mismatch of the 62% in Scotland against the 48% in the UK, that it makes a referendum more likely, more quickly, correct?
No, I don't think anything's automatic at the moment. Independence was not our starting point in these discussions. What we have seen is the people of Scotland having a different debate over the referendum. I did 40 public meetings up and down the country. And the issue in Scotland was actually trying to get people interested, because we were tired after the Holyrood election. We've had a lot of democracy in Scotland recently, and there was such a consensus within Scotland politically and everywhere else that this is just in the best place for us. If you've got Nigel Farage on one side and David Cameron on the other, well, a plague in both your houses. Guy is peace, son, was actually where a lot of people in Scotland were on this. And we also saw where politics is in other places in these islands. We saw an ugly campaign
Right, so why does that not make the referendum more likely? Why are you ducking it if all the body politic is moving in one direction?
No, we're not ducking anything. As I said in the Sunday Herald a few weeks back, independence is on the table because what self-respecting government wouldn't have all the options on the table? And Brexit has changed the political weather at home and abroad to independence. But the case is not ready yet. The case is in preparation. The world's moving pretty fast right now. We didn't ask for this. We didn't bring this about. We campaigned against Brexit. We voted against Brexit. So we now find ourselves in a situation where we're all Democrats and we all respect the fact that the people of the UK have, by a narrow margin, voted for something, and the people of Scotland, by a significant margin, have voted for something else. So now we need to find solutions to that. Independence is part of that picture.
Ming, you and I have known each other for a pretty long time, 20 years or so since I started. A few years. Since I began the time that I was there in the lobby working in Parliament, and with Robin Cook and Iraq and all those events around then, you have been a consistent and impassioned supporter of the Union and of the European Union. As the therapist might say, how do you feel?
Apprehensive, but it's not the audience that makes me feel so. You're quite right. The two things which have been important in my political life have been the union of the United Kingdom, accompanied, of course, by a strong and overwhelming and increasingly objective view that the proper solution to the United Kingdom is a federal system of government in which the four nations agree those subjects which they consider should best be dealt with on a group basis, but are otherwise entitled to conduct their own affairs as they please. And the second, a great passion, I suppose, is the European Union. And here, if I may, I'll be a little more personal than some have been so far. I was born in 1941. The night before I was born, my mother spent a fortnight every night in an air raid shelter because we lived in the West End of Glasgow and the Nazi bombers were doing their best to destroy shipbuilding capability on the Clyde and weren't always particularly fastidious as to where they put their bombs. And the first thing I recall growing up, asking what a noise was and being told it was the noise of gunfire. And I was brought up in the 1940s. One or two of you may remember that. If people talk about austerity today, they ain't seen nothing yet unless they go back to the 1940s. So my commitment, my enthusiasm for the union, not just about economics, it's political. And I have absolutely no embarrassment in saying that the European Union should be a political union. And the reason for that is quite simple. We are faced by a whole variety of challenges, but one in particular is the challenge from a resurgent Russia under an extreme nationalist in the shape of Mr. Putin. He has two objectives. One is the undermining of NATO. Donald Trump's helped that, hasn't he, by saying the United States would not go to the support of the Baltic nations in the event that anything happened which triggered the Article 5 obligation under NATO. And the United Kingdom has helped Mr. Putin on that, because whatever else we've done, we have destabilized Europe. And the question is, what kind of Europe will emerge? What kind of United Kingdom will emerge? Or what kind of Europe will emerge at the end of this process? And I'm not at all surprised, and I would agree pretty well everyone else is right. None of us has got a solution here. Every possible solution is on the table. And no one understands or reflects the fact that if you are negotiating with the remaining 27 members of the European Union, they will all have national interests which they will be determined to protect. Fishing, perhaps, so far as Spain is concerned. The ability of Volkswagen to export as many cars into the United Kingdom as it enjoys at the moment. They will all have individual interests which they will protect. And remember, the final decision would have to be on the basis of unanimity. No opportunity now for qualified majority voting or anything of that kind. Philip Hammond says it might take 6 years. I want to ask you what you think happens in those 6 years. Because I don't know, and I don't think anyone else on the platform knows what happens in these next 6 years. And you know, part of the problem, I'm trying to look forward because we've been good at looking back but not forward. What we don't know, and what we may never know, is what decisions are being taken in the boardrooms of the top 100 companies in the United Kingdom. How many people are deciding we will not invest in Britain because we are concerned about uncertainty? We'd rather have the certainty and the security of being within the single market.
Well, I can tell you from my own experience, there's a lot of discussion in the major creative industries companies on exactly these points. Now, I just want to, I mean, in our discussion...
I'm not finished yet.
Okay, go on. But then I want to move on to the specifics,
yes,
and that's why I want to move on from this.
But, I mean, if you read yesterday's newspaper, Gus O'Donnell, former Cabinet Secretary, one of the best, I think, since the war, setting out the very obstacles and problems which there lie ahead for us. And let me just finish with one last thing. At Murrayfield, I cheer for Scotland. Not always to great effect, it has to be said. If I'd been at Lord's yesterday, I'd cheered for England. Wherever the Ryder Cup is played, I cheer for Europe. These are not competing affiliations. They're entirely complementary. And my anxiety is that the decision which has been taken undermines one of those, and my equal anxiety is that a possible consequence of that, then another of these assumptions may be undermined. And it may well be, as has just been said, that it's not yet the time for a referendum. But on Friday of this week, the government, the Scottish National Government, is embarking on a programme designed to persuade people of the merits of independence. Make your own mind up.
To your point about a lack of clarity, to be polite, in the UK government, we've now been in the last 2 months working intensively with the 3 foreign ministries which we now have: the Foreign Office, the Department for International Trade, and the Department for Exiting the EU. The 3 men in a bed scenario each evening.
Not before the watershed, if you don't mind.
And
Can I just point out, in the Tory party, there's nothing unusual about that.
Now, he wins the gag of the day, that one. That's brilliant.
That'll be on the front page of the Herald tomorrow.
Exactly. And the Department for the new Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and DCMS, and Number 10, and Treasury, and probably others that I've forgotten. We're dealing with all of them. You say to them, so what is the plan? Can we get back to you? And that, I'm just saying that to you, and that is the case. Now, it could be because of the surprise. There was no scenario planning from the Remain side or the Brexit side for what happens now, and one can only assume in September. So, in the spirit of generosity, I think we owe it, both the panellists and the audience, to help. Right, so what is the next case? So, Richard, is it hard Brexit, out, completely out of the single market, visa restrictions, closed borders, take control, whatever? Is it a softer version? Is it, I'm sure you won't say it, Brexit, but not quite Brexit? When should Article 50 be triggered? And I'm going to go round the platform. And I just want very specific thoughts on the next stage, please.
On Article 50, the article of the Lisbon Treaty that invokes the procedure for a member state to exit, I think it'll be invoked early next year. That's what Theresa May told me when I went to see her. I asked her specifically when she thought, will it, and she said she'd said in the campaign it wouldn't be by the 31st of December. And I said, I'm not worried about that, but do you mean, when you say, soonish, do you mean January, February, or do you mean July, August? And she said, oh, December, January type of time. And I think it'll be relatively soon that it's invoked. And I certainly think, as far as the Brexiteers in Parliament are concerned, they want to see it's invoked relatively soon. Inevitably, there's going to be a process of negotiation. Inevitably, until that's done, you can't define all those terms. But, I mean, I don't know anybody who wants to stop as many British people who wish to do so from buying German cars. And when people ask the question, well, what's going to happen now? My experience is that the sun will continue to rise in the morning, the crops will continue to grow in the field, people will continue to buy German cars. And lots of things that have carried on. After all, it was Stuart Rose, the chairman of the Remain campaign, who said, in the first 4 to 5 years, you'll see relatively little difference. In 10 to 15 years, you will probably see bigger differences in terms of the economic shifts, in terms of the balance of trade and so on. For example, I mean, 10 years ago, 56% of our trade was with the EU. But because the Eurozone in particular is not growing and has been in an economic crisis for a significant period of time, And I might say in parenthesis, by the way, I think if there were an independent Scotland, it would be insane for an independent Scotland not to secure what has only been secured by the UK and Denmark, namely an opt-out from the single currency, if it could. Every other of the 11 countries who are not members of the single currency yet are obliged to join, with the exception of Denmark. Sweden is trying to get out of its obligation to join, but I mean, it is legally obliged to do so. The last thing the Scottish economy needs is to be forced into the single currency at a time that's not of its own choosing.
I'm not going to let you get away. I would like an answer from you on the framework, obviously not on the specifics.
Yeah.
Do you think it would be a good or a bad thing for the UK to remain within the single market and to have free movement of goods and services and of labour?
I don't think it's a good idea to have complete freedom of labour. I don't think it's that important, I know everyone says it is, that we remain within the single market. It is important that we have access to the single market, just as the United States has access to the single market, just as Korea has access to the single market, just as China has access to the single market, these other minnows of world trade. And I don't see any reason why that shouldn't continue. I mean, I've always believed, which is why I've been always completely confident about what will happen, is that it's extremely difficult to separate willing buyers from willing sellers, and trade will continue.
Briefly, the three of you, starting with you, Alyn. You were upset, you're still angry. Let's park that for a second, even though you probably don't want to. What is the next, if Brexit means Brexit, whatever that means, but if Brexit means Brexit, what is the least worst, in your opinion, Brexit?
The least worst is that our starting position is we want to remain part of the single market, and we celebrate the freedom of movement that has given us massive rights as Scots to live, work, study, travel, retire across the EU, and has enriched our society and community with so many people coming to Scotland. Now that's our starting point. So anything short of that is a poor option. So if and as and when we see some sort of clarity coming out of the Whitehall apparatus about what Brexit looks like, there's then two dynamics. The dynamic is that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And within Brussels, we've already seen how this is going. You know, the delusion of exceptionalism that dear old Blighty can demand some sort of special deal, there is goodwill, and it will go to a point. But then every other member state, which will be acting as a block of 27, turns out 27 is actually a bigger number than 1. So we are going to have to deal with all the realities of each of the individual member states. Maybe Cyprus will put a block on whatever Brexit's going to be until they see some serious progress towards reunification of the island. Maybe Greece will do it until they see some sort of bailout resolution. Maybe Germany will do it until they see something else. Maybe Denmark will do it until they sort out access to our fisheries grounds. The UK will not be able to pick and choose.
Okay, Merryn.
Well, we talked earlier about lies told and lies not told during the run-up, and the only one that has been proven so far to be an absolute lie is what David Cameron kept saying, which was that he would invoke Article 50 the day after the referendum. Now, I'm quite glad he did lie about that.
Another one was that there would be war in Europe. We haven't had war in Europe yet.
Yeah, there wasn't one in Europe. You're absolutely right. No World War III, no collapse of the stock market, no collapse of the housing market, no collapse of the export market, etc. All fine. So
I thought we weren't going to disentangle the campaign. I want to look ahead, please.
I'm glad he didn't invoke it that day, but I'd be pretty keen to get on with it pretty quickly, and I'd go full-on hard Brexit myself. You know, these years and years and years of boring negotiations, we could probably just dump the whole lot. Say that we keep things as the status quo at the moment. We're out. We'll bring all the EU law we currently use into UK law. We'll carry on using it. We'll commit to using the money we save for not being in the European Union to continuing to fund everything we currently fund for 5 years or so and take it from there.
Good. Well,
take it on our own terms.
That's commendable clarity. Ming.
You can't answer your question until you know what position is going to be adopted by Germany and France, the two principal drivers of the European Union. Why can't you answer the question? Because each, Merkel, under siege because of her policy towards immigrants, and Hollande under siege by Sarkozy. Each are facing general elections next year, the outcome of which is in doubt. Neither of them can afford, nor will be persuaded, to offer the kind of concessions which would meet some of the aspirations which we've heard on the platform this afternoon. They will not be able to do that because in each case, in France's case, you've got Marine Le Pen. In Germany, they have a similar right-wing movement. If the suggestion is that you can leave the European Union and somehow continue to enjoy some of the benefits, then that can only fan those in these two countries who wish either Germany or France to come out. Neither Hollande nor Merkel can afford to make any kind of concession which would have the effect of encouraging separatism within their own countries. That's why the question is incapable of sensible answer. You can speculate, as indeed has happened, speculate as much as you like, but the fact of the matter is, unless you're round the table, menu or no menu, negotiating, and the other point to make about, if I may, very quickly about negotiation, negotiation is about making concessions in order to achieve concessions. What concessions are those who argue for Brexit willing to make to the European Union?
Right.
Well,
now listen.
well,
No.
can I answer that question? I mean,
If it is one sentence, because I want to get it to questions.
well, the concession would be we continue to let them sell to us as much as we want without tariffs, if that's what they want to do.
Fine. All right. Now I'm sure we're going to have a lot of questions. We've got about 15 minutes. If I could ask them to be brief and non-polemical, please, and where possible. Well, no. I mean, whatever. I'm just saying. I want us to focus on where do we go from here? Right in the middle. Yep. And then there in the side. After that, right, go ahead.
Can we take it back to the economics question that was raised in the first place? It's clear that if there was going to be a second referendum in Scotland, to get over the 60% mark, it's going to be the economics that pushes the 55 over to 60. Can we come up with a coherent argument? We may be a bit less wealthy in the future, but have a fairer society. Can we argue from that perspective? Because in hard economics, it's always going to be hard to say we will be wealthier. We may just be a better society.
Okay, and I'm not going to ask everybody to answer every question, but I'll ask Alyn to answer that.
The case for the second independence referendum, if and as and when we get there, will be different to the case in 2014 because the world's changed a lot. There's also lessons to be learned from what worked last time, what didn't work last time. So that's what the summer initiative, which is being launched on Friday, is all about. It's about opening the space for that discussion about what sort of Scotland do we want to see and how do we want to interact to the world around us. And the point about the better society, absolutely. I think we're going to see a choice between two unions. And bargain basement Brexit Britain is just not a place I don't think is going to be appealing to the vast majority of people in Scotland. Now, that's an evolving situation, but the case, you can't ask us to make a case that hasn't been written yet. It's evolving, and it will evolve, and until such point as we're ready to put that forward, we're not going to put that forward. We do mean we're looking for solutions to this.
But
I'm talking about status within the EU rather than membership.
But can you make a case for independence based on 97% minus oil revenues?
We can make a case for independence. The economics are part of it, but it's also about what sort of country do you want to be? How do you want to interact with the rest of the world?
Okay, there in the corner.
Could I ask the panel, once we have a blueprint for what Brexit will actually mean in reality, does the panel believe that at that point there would be justification for a second referendum?
A second EU referendum?
EU referendum.
Right. Richard?
No.
Okay, thank you. Those are the kind of questions, answers I like. Me?
Yes.
Right, and
And can I put a gloss on it? Because I'm not a member of the Commons, I'm a member of the House of Lords, and therefore my role is necessarily circumscribed with the fact that we are unelected. But supposing I still was the Member of Parliament for North East Fife, and a proposal was made in the course of this negotiated settlement, which I believed was wholly contrary to the interests of my constituents, to whom I would owe my primary loyalty, what is my responsibility? To vote for this in the knowledge it would damage my constituents, or to vote against it in order to protect their interests? I've tried that question on quite a few occasions since the 23rd of June, and so far no one has ventured an answer.
next question. Is that here? Is that the person you're pointing at? Yeah, here.
In terms of looking forward, could the panel tell me if we wanted to export today a case of Traquair Ale to Europe, the duty that is paid, leaving aside alcohol duty today, and if we had hard Brexit with no single market access, what would it cost?
Merryn.
I have no idea what the tariff on ale would be. But on average, tariffs across are 2 to 3%, but there are higher tariffs on agricultural products and cars coming in from automobiles, that kind of thing, coming in from outside, none on computer equipment, etc. So I don't know ale specifically, but I imagine the tariff on that would go up.
If you go to the Valhalla Brewery in Unst, in the northernmost point of Shetland, their biggest export market by far is Norway, which is not even in the EU. So I think trade will continue. Ultimately, it'll depend how many people want to buy Traquair ale. And frankly, I don't think 2 or 3% is going to make a lot of difference.
Well, I think
But
this
listen,
is the
have
key
you
point.
tried to
and
buy
the
a
same with
drink?
financial
Have you tried to
services.
buy a drink in Norway recently? Do you know what the price is?
Well, that's the decision of the Norwegian government to have high tax. It's their privilege if
Right.
they want to do
Yeah, well, I
that.
think this is really important. The trade point has to be picked up. You know, you may have seen in the news today that the US-EU trade deal is beginning to fall to pieces. But do you see anyone throwing their arms up and going, oh my God, we can't have a trade with the US because we haven't had a deal and now we're going to have a deal? No, trade continues. Trade is trade. People buy and sell what they want, regardless of these trade deals. Otherwise, we'd never sell a thing to the US and they'd never sell a thing to
No,
us.
and that's absolutely
Okay,
true.
and I just want to clarify
Same with
with
the
you,
ale.
when you were advocating very starkly for hard Brexit, and a lot of people talking about, well, we can be international, just a different form of internationalism, doesn't have to be two-tiered with EU first, everybody else second. Are you absolutely confident that Japanese, American, other companies in financial services, in life sciences, in health, in creative industries, whatever, who use the UK not just for the advantages of the UK, but as the bridgehead into Europe, that having been soon to be whipped away, are you absolutely convinced that it's going to be business as usual for
Well, I'm not.
non-EU companies?
Yeah. I'm not 100% convinced about anything because that would be silly. But
Confident?
I'm quite confident on the basis that people come to the UK for all sorts of reasons. There's language, there's the legal system, there's property rights, there's our astonishing political stability. I mean, you cannot deny that, you know, no, it is absolutely amazing.
In
that
this
after,
country, certainly,
Wait, I'm
but-
talking, after the Brexit vote when everyone was going, oh my God, the world will end, within a matter of weeks, we had a new government, a stable government, run by people no one particularly objects to, and I can't see that happening in any other country, that you could have a vote like this that was so dramatic and have a new government in place so quickly with so little instability. You know, I think it's extraordinary, and that's one of the reasons people come here.
Right, more questions. Lady, no, thank you. Lady at the back, and then right here in the front, and then also here in the front. Yes?
I find it very difficult to hear what seems to me to be so many meaningless mantras about us always buying German cars. Everything seems to come down to economics. Would the panel please share with us how we protect and further encourage our values that we have as international people with international integration? Because values seem not to have been spoken about, and at the bottom line, isn't that what it's all about, our vision of being part of the world?
Thank you. Well, Alyn, that is exactly what in Parliament you did speak about. So develop the point, please.
Very happily. I mean, one of the reasons why I'm passionate about the European Union, with all its faults, and this is where I've had to defend a number of things that I would change about the EU myself in this debate, but either you're in favour of internationalism and multilateralism or you're not. And what the UK has done is to send the worst possible example to the wider world. A rejection of multilateralism. You know, the EU is war avoidance in action. It's never again made real. It's about the people of Europe getting to know each other better by living, working, studying, travelling in each other's countries. It's about the governments of Europe working together on whatever it is. And the UK has walked away from it on a premise that was absolutely flawed. And what is going to replace the status quo is going to be worse. Gentleman's point about tariffs. So what are the tariffs going to be? I don't know. But why are there going to be any at all? How can having tariffs in and out of our market make things better? How can having to negotiate a special deal for our students to go in Erasmus, a special deal for us to take part in EU peacekeeping efforts, a special deal for us to cooperate in international development, how can that be a better situation than we're in now? The UK actually doesn't have a bad story to tell on this stuff. I think Scotland could do it better, but the UK's actually made a big contribution to internationalism, the rule of law, international development. It's not all bad, and we've walked away from it for nothing.
Ming.
have to tell you, there's a serious risk of agreement breaking out on the panel.
I think only between two of you.
That'll do.
It's quite right to mention those things which we have rule of law, respect for individuals, and remember what the European Union, I hinted at a little while ago, what it grew out of. It grew out of a determination that France and Germany should not be at each other's throats, which they had been in the 3 times in the previous 100 years. And why is it that countries which suffered under fascism and communism, sometimes both, have queued up to join the European Union? Because it reflects human rights, it reflects freedom of expression, it brings a political stability as against the way in which they had to live before. And that's why I say it is a political union, and it should be regarded as such. And it's perfectly right to say that countries which are democracies and which are in close relationships, as indeed ours are within the European Union, do not go to war against each other.
Right, we've got to get through still a few more questions. There were 2 in the front and the lady in about 2/3 of the way back. Yeah.
Thank
Now
you,
let's
Chair.
do these together.
Thank you, Chair. Can I first of all applaud Richard for not taking the automatic line that some Conservatives take of linking the European referendum to an independence referendum, but can I challenge him that his position on access to the single market is implausible, in that the issue with trade is not about tariff barriers, as we keep hearing. The challenge of trade, and I hear that time and again from local businesses, is the regulations, the standards, effectively the non-tariff barriers, which can only be effectively handled if you are working within rather than from access to the single market. And therefore, the only plausible position as for Brexiteers is Merryn's impossible position of hard Brexit.
Okay, thanks. Here and then 2/3 of the way back. Yeah, there.
The first bit, simply for Mr Bacon, how will George Freeman's policy unit integrate with the 3 other Brexit units? And to all of you, the academic community in Scotland is very concerned about the future of collaboration within academia across Europe and across the world. That is something which none of you has made reference to, and I would like your views.
Thank you. Yeah. Lady there. Yeah. Just there. Thanks.
Do the 2 Brexiteers on the panel not find it problematic that Brexit was won on the back of a huge wave of xenophobia?
Okay. Time for one more. Anybody wants to ask last question, or we confine it to those 3? Okay, we'll stick to those 3 non-tariff barriers. Richard, on that.
Yeah, on non-tariff barriers. I mean, I have the car company Lotus, which manufactures sports cars in my constituency. They used not to be able to export to the United States because they didn't meet US crash standards. They adapted their model so that they did, and now California is a very big export market for them. We export more to the United States, considerably more than we do to France and Germany combined, and we run a trade surplus with them. So there are 165 countries in the world that are not members of the European Union. Not only do they mostly rub along fine, but we trade with pretty much all of them. So I think a lot of these are straw men, they're shimmers. They're not serious problems. They're not problems that are not overcomeable. In response to the lady's question about George Freeman, who's my immediate parliamentary neighbour, I haven't had the chance to speak to him since he was appointed to the chair of this policy board. And so the answer to your question on how it will interact with the foreign ministries, I simply don't know yet.
And to you and to Merryn, the question about, and then I'll come to the other two, about xenophobia.
Well, I think it's a strange way to phrase it. And if you look at all the surveys afterwards, most people didn't vote on that basis. And there may be a couple of, I don't know how many people who did vote on that basis, but it certainly wasn't 17 million. So I have to say I find it a rather bemusing and an odd thing to be focusing on at this point. I'd also say that there were many, many reasons why people voted out, and most of them, I think, were to do with sovereignty, democracy, and economics. And you may say people voted because they wanted to prevent immigration, but in the main, what they wanted to do was to have the ability to prevent immigration, which is a very, very different thing.
The question of academic we haven't talked about.
Yes, I touched on it a wee bit about Erasmus.
Yeah, you did.
It's close to my heart. I mean, on the Standing Council on Europe, which I'm privileged to be a member, it's the convener's Professor Anton Muscatelli from Glasgow Uni. And the Scottish Government is working very hard to give as much reassurance as we can that Scotland continues to want to engage in whatever's coming. We've seen some reassurance over the likes of Horizon 2020 funding, which has been positive. But it's the rejection of the multilateralism and the reputational damage that the UK has just done. I've been getting emails from students who are deeply worried about, should I still take up my offer of a place at Aberdeen Uni? will I still be able to get a grant? Will I still be able to travel? All of that stuff is now up in the air for so little, just so little. Now, there are ways that can be found. Of course, ways can be found. But it's predicated upon there being goodwill and common sense. And we haven't seen a lot of common sense domestically, and I'm not sure we're going to see a lot of goodwill internationally. The implications of Brexit have not dawned on everybody for a second.
Ming, any final thoughts on any of those three?
Well, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that so-called hate crimes have increased, and indeed if you read your newspapers in Scotland this week, you'd have seen evidence of that issued by the Scottish Police Authority, and there's a lot of such evidence elsewhere. I have to say that I thought that the poster, which showed thousands of refugees, tired, hungry, frightened, and was displayed in support of the campaign to remove Britain from the European Union, was an outright disgrace.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And one last, very quickly. And very quickly on universities, I have the good fortune to be the Chancellor of the University of St Andrews. St Andrews is smaller than many Scottish universities, but it has a well-developed international reputation and connection. I can tell you that without qualification, those in St Andrews who rely upon joint project management and research based on European Union funds are extremely nervous indeed, as indeed should be the Scotch beef industry, because at the moment there are flyers going around saying, buy and eat Scotch beef. If you look in the top right-hand corner, you'll see funded by the European Development Fund.
Right, I haven't told Mark I'm going to do this. It's the finish sign, but I'm going to do it anyway. Let's do a show of hands, and I'm going to out you all. What did you vote on June the 23rd? Hands up who voted to remain. Hands up who voted to leave. Okay. Any hands up for any of you who now, with hindsight, no matter which way you voted, might have changed your minds? Okay. During the Scottish referendum, how many of you voted for independence? How many voted to stay in the UK? If there were a referendum to take place in the next 6 or 12 months, how many of you might now change your minds? And would all of those changing minds be in favour of independence? Would any of you who voted independence now vote to stay? Okay. Anyway, I thought that was interesting, and it's an interesting way to end what I think we could have done another 2 hours on this. It's been a bit staccato, it's been a huge haul, but please thank, no matter which way you voted, all our panellists.